Welcome to Orr Group Talks. We'll just give a few minutes for our participants to join, but really excited to have all of you here today and for this opportunity to discuss the impact of executive collaboration, why fundraising, finance, and operations leaders must work together. We'll just wait one more minute before we introduce our speakers and go through a couple of housekeeping rules. But again, thank you so much for everyone being here today and for joining our Orr Group Talks. Really thrilled to have this conversation. All right, well, why don't we get started? Really quickly, I'm Amanda Nelson, a managing director at Orr Group, and I'm joined here today with Russatta Buford, Chief Operating Officer at the Ms. Foundation for Women, and Dominick Impemba, Chief Operating and Finance Officer at the New York Community Trust. Thank you both so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights with our community. Before I have both of you introduce yourselves to our audience, just wanted to remind everybody, this is an hour-long session. We will have time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section of this Zoom chat, and we'll have time at the end to go through them. Also, we are recording this session, so you'll be receiving this later. And again, really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with Dominick and with Russatta. And why don't we get into it? So I'll ask you both to introduce yourselves with a quick overview of your role and your organization. And then we'll go from there.
Great. Russatta, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Russatta Buford. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Ms. Foundation for Women. So we're the nation's first women's foundation, and we believe in building women's collective power in the U.S. We invest in and strengthen the capacity of women-led movements, and we advance meaningful social, cultural, and economic change. So in my role, I have to tell you, first of all, that I love my role because I get to think about every aspect of our organization every day. I get to manage finance, legal, HR, technology, facilities, administration, operations, and annual planning. So if I'm doing my job well, I am the connective tissue of the organization. I am weaving together the work streams of each department so that we are thinking about how we're working together. It's never boring. Prior to working at the foundation, I worked at a technology nonprofit. I worked in international development, and I worked in education. And before that, I was a chemical engineer who found her way into financial services. Dominick?
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Dominick Impemba, Chief Operating and Finance Officer at New York Community Trust. The New York Community Trust is a community foundation celebrating its 100th year this year. We are known for working in the 5 boroughs, Westchester and Long Island, and are the ones, for those that are familiar with, creating the concept of the Donor Advised Fund back in the 1930s. So it all started here at New York Community Trust. I am responsible for finance, for administration, for IT, and for human resources. Like Russatta, and I'll say this, she did, and I'm an operations and process geek. I love process and making sure things line up. Prior to here, I was the chief financial officer at the Rockefeller Foundation. So with this talk, I come at it both from my prior experience as a funder and seeing what the grantees were looking for, but now on this side of the house, seeing what we need to do as a as we look for donors at New York Community Trust. So really happy to be here.
An operations geek and a chemical engineer. Perfect combination for this conversation. So my first question for both of you, I think we'll set the stage here. Dominick, why don't you start first? Can you let us know what you perceive as the most significant challenges nonprofits face in achieving their fundraising goals in today's landscape?
Yeah, one of the big things, and I wanted to check this number before, but there's about 1.5 million 501c3 public charities in the U.S. And when you think about all the requests that organizations will get, there's a lot of competition out there, and I've seen it at the funder side where you know, as organizations are requesting, there's a lot that the funders need to sift through. And I know we'll get into some of the things that are there, but it is a really competitive landscape. There's more and more need, as we're seeing, especially as you know, right here in New York City, when the government says it's not going to do something, your next logical step is, okay, we've got to turn to philanthropy. And what can philanthropy do? It's just an additional pull on resources. And with so many organizations and so much need, it's you know, you've got to be able to differentiate yourself and stand out.
Russatta, your thoughts?
I think it really depends upon what type of nonprofit you are and at what stage you are, how large you are. So if you are an organization that is, you know, if you have contracts with the city, for instance, perhaps the city pays you late, or maybe you have a contract and they are not giving you perhaps top dollar for quality services. Maybe you receive a lot of restricted funding, and you really should be receiving, as all of us know, more unrestricted funding. Even Ms. Foundation, we're an intermediary. We receive a mix of restricted and unrestricted dollars, but as an intermediary, we also fund other nonprofits, and we make it a point to engage in trust-based philanthropy, and give unrestricted dollars. But I know that one thing that all nonprofits struggle with is receiving the full amount of funding that is required to deliver the quality programming that their communities deserve. And so it is covering the full cost that their programs require. So it's covering direct costs, indirect costs, core mission support. And so I would say that is probably one of the perpetual challenges that nonprofits face.
I'd love to spend more time talking about that. But first, I also want to hear your perspective on how collaboration between finance, operations, and development addresses these challenges, and how has it contributed to your fundraising success? So, Russatta, maybe you can build off what you were just saying there.
Yeah, you know, on that last point, you know, covering the full cost, I think this is where finance and development work hand in hand. So finance has a really good grasp on what the costs are. And so this is where we can work together to paint a full and a beautiful picture of how the budget and the program work together. So right now, when you look at a budget, the budget is really framed around the organization. You know, it looks at the revenue and the expenses, and it just looks at the organization, and it's around personnel and audit and so forth, but it doesn't really allow a donor to look at the cost as a function of how the services are delivered to deliver effective programming for I guess mission delivered, right? And but if we are able to paint a picture of how we are able to deliver programming for the mission and for quality services in a place-based program, or just for whatever it may be, that is what is going to paint the picture for the need. And this is the partnership that I think our two departments can deliver if we are actually working together effectively. So I think this is the partnership that, I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate right here. I think this is what we can do together if we are able to start talking about core mission support. Instead of talking just about direct costs, if we are able to look at direct costs for the program specifically, but also looking at general programming costs, but looking at the fundraising costs that are necessary, the necessary facilities costs, the learning and development costs for our staff, the necessary technology costs in order to connect our staff, our volunteers, our community, whatever it may be that deliver the services to our community, then we are able to tell our funders, this is how we are delivering the services that make a difference for the communities we are serving. And I think this is the way that we are able to capture the full cost of our programs.
Dominic, building off of that, would love to hear any examples you have of opportunities that you've collaborated on to educate stakeholders and donors about the importance of covering the full operational costs as core mission support, as Russatta is saying, and how you've helped ensure capturing the true cost of that work and overhead of everything that Russatta just listed out, which every time she shares something around this, there's more, I'm a little bit blown away about that.
Yeah, it's and I completely agree with Russatta's point. I think finance and fundraising need to be in lockstep. From the standpoint in my prior life as the CFO at the Rockefeller Foundation, again, from the funder side, I was part of, and you both said the words, what we called the True Cost Initiative. We as funders recognized that organizations were requesting funds and they weren't including the true cost of what it was to, not just to run the program, but to kind of, let's call it, make some money. Because why would you want to give to an organization if they're going to have to cover costs related to your funding? And what we found was that organizations would accept the funders 10 to roughly 20% of total costs, of total indirect, direct costs as kind of their, to cover all their overhead, for to use that phrase. But what we found when we did the math from the financial side, these organizations were actually running 40 cents on the dollar, so 40%. Now, I don't know that funders would get all the way there, but unless you are honest and upfront with the funders that this is what it really costs to do this, and again, involving the finance teams at your organizations, unless you're honest and upfront, you can't have that dialogue, and all you will have is every year 10%, okay, maybe it's 12%. And you're taking these funds and they're essentially loss leaders, which is not what anybody wants, because we want to be able to drive impact, and we want to be able to, driving impact outside the organization, but then having the organization have to lay people off because they didn't include their costs in the grant just seems like some kind of twisted irony to me. So
I have a question from someone in the audience about this. And do either of you have recommendations about the best way to communicate these costs to donors who may have already, shared, like, I don't want to cover administrative expenses? Any recommendations you have for our audience around how to best communicate this?
So one of the things that we've done with some of our donors is in the cultivation meetings is bring in colleagues from other departments. So you start to bring in colleagues from your technology team or from operations staff, so you can start to make the case for how these different functional areas are very necessary for the delivery of the program. So they're integral to the program. So you can't start to strip away these things from the actual program. So you can't take away 10%, you can't take away 5%. So it just is baked into the program delivery cost. The other thing that we start to do is talk about them as strategic finance, or we talk about it as an underlying general programming cost. we never use it. We never use the word overhead. And I know you didn't frame the question as such, but we never use the word overhead. And what I've tried not to do is in my narrative, I try not to call it administrative expenses. We try to talk about it in the program delivery. We try to talk about it as being very integral as a need for the program manager. But Dominick, I don't know if you have any other tips.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. What we had told organizations is, you've got to include it, you've got to put it in the proposal, you've got to write it down, because it's at least the starting point to have the conversation. Because without it, and I know, I'm not putting my head in the sand, there is definitely a power imbalance as these organizations are requesting funds. But I think it's important that, and there are organizations out there who are willing to listen and to say, okay, yes, I see how, to your point, Russatta, how this, plays in, and how technology is necessary for delivery of what I'm looking to do. And again, you may not get everything that's, there. You may not get everything you ask because of budget constraints at the funder organization, but at least you have that dialogue and you open the door, as opposed to just putting, as Russatta mentioned, administrative costs with nothing behind it, or just, yeah, that includes everything else, or that's our overhead rate. No funder is going to want to hear that. If you're thoughtful about the approach, and the funder is open to the discussion, I think that's the best way to go.
One theme that I think both of you are talking about, and we know as well from our own work with clients, is around the importance of early collaboration. And we've got a couple questions here that are sort of aligned with that. So I want to try to get to those now. So one along the lines, Dominick, of what you're saying of just communicate it, get it on paper, and there are organizations that'll listen. Is there an indirect cost range that you find funders find appropriate? Is there a ceiling that you've heard of? And then similarly, a question here about how do you develop the valuation process that determines how much on the dollar these costs are? For example, is there some set market rate to follow in developing these costs?
Yeah, so I'll answer these, I think, in a varying order. So I've been, and I neglected to mention this at the outset, I've worked my whole career, 27 years, with not-for-profit organizations. I feel like I've seen the overhead rate from organizations in the 10 to 15% range over those 27 years. And that, to me, is that's impossible. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of where it's headed, I think when we polled some organizations, we asked them to complete some worksheets, part of that project I was part of. And when they did, laying out salaries and who's working on what, and there was this whole machinations, and I think it still is available through BDO FMA for those that are interested. There is a spreadsheet that we've put out there. But what it came to was roughly and again, using the term overhead, was in the 35 to 40%, 35 to 40 cents on the dollar. Again, I don't think in 1 year you're going to go from the 10 to 12 to the 35 to 40, but maybe it's a gradual shift to get closer to that number, so that you are not covering the costs for delivering on a program. So did I get all the questions there, or was there something else?
No, that was great. Russatta, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is I don't use overhead, I don't use administrative. I use core mission support. And I ask various funders what their typical, what their allowable indirect cost rate is. Some will tell you what their maximum rate is. And there are some that will ask you for proof. They will want to see your calculations for your indirect cost rate. If you have not calculated your indirect cost rate, it is a very tough calculation.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time and effort to do it. And it takes effort to actually update it. You'll need to update it periodically if you have significant changes to your staff growth with inflation, if you have big changes to your restricted to unrestricted mix, or big changes in your contractual rate changes. So if things change a lot with your organization, then your indirect cost rate will also change. So that initial effort, though, is a lot if you want to know your actual indirect cost rate. And I know that there are a lot of nonprofits that will just sometimes choose a number, and that's fine, actually. But to actually do it right, it takes a lot of effort. And once you do it, it takes some effort to maintain it, but you should, to figure out what it is, especially if you want to capture your full value.
That's a really great point. And I think, you know, Russatta, the point you made about talking to the donor and asking these questions up front, you know, they're doing diligence on you, but would love to ask you two questions about the diligence that you may be doing on the donors, managing their expectations. You know, are there strategies that you've employed for doing that kind of diligence on donors? And how do you manage those expectations while also fostering and helping build those positive relationships?
That for me or for
Let's start with you, Dominic, and also the unique history you have at the New York Community Trust.
Yeah. So one of the things that is paramount, and I'm sure most folks are doing this, as even when the idea of a donor or an organization is still in its early stages, is to do what I call light due diligence. Just, you know, understand, you know, where these funds have come from, or you know, potential you know, stances the organization or the individual has taken. I won't mention names. We had a situation where there was, you know, mention in my prior role at Rockefeller of a substantial donor wanting to collaborate with us on an initiative, and just that week or even the week before, there was some negative publicity around some things the organization, this donor, had come out and said, and it was in direct conflict with another initiative we were running at the foundation. Now, that's not to say at the end of the day, we all get to yes, and we collaborate with the donor. But at that point, and this is exactly what we did, you bring in you know, if you've got a communications firm or a communications team, to make them aware. Because as things start to come out and as things start to happen, you don't want to be on the back foot of something like this. And you've got things prepared and you're ready. And hopefully you as an organization can get past, okay, here's what was said here. We're working in this area, but maybe it's not the same, but as we know, the media and others will make it the same. You know, how do we address this? Because we really want to collaborate with this individual on this other program. So I think early stages, and that was just timing because it happened at the same time, but there could be things from months or years prior that, you know, someone will look to make a bigger issue of. So light due diligence up front before you know, the fundraising team goes too far ahead, and then all of a sudden it comes back to finance or others in operations that say, hold on, we've got to look at this. And then that slows things down. Back to what I said earlier, how do you differentiate yourself? If you can speedily accept donations because you've done all that due diligence up front and you've done it early, that's a big differentiator in today's day and age.
That's a great point. Anything you want to add to this, Russatta?
You know, I'll say on in my experience, development hasn't really come to operations or finance for due diligence on donors. It usually comes after the fact. And that's fine, you know, you deal with it. And so there have been instances when there was a time when we wanted to honor one of our longstanding donors, funders, actually. It was a bank. who had been supporting us for 20 years, but it was during the time when a lot of banks were being called out for predatory lending practices. And it just was not the time to honor this bank. So we needed to be very thoughtful about how to honor this relationship, but also be very reflective about this moment in time. And then there was another situation in which a funder had given us well over $1 million, but their reputation in the community that we served was not very strong in our community, and because they were doing things that just were not great, but yet we had already accepted the money. And so what do we do? Because they had qualified to be listed in our annual report. So it just made us step back and think about, what do we do in those instances? Now let's think about our gift acceptance policy. And also, let's have a statement about mission alignment. And instead of leaving it up to interpretation, because we are now left in these very precarious situations, let's spell it out. So it just, put us in positions where we needed to be a lot more explicit. And that is the partnership then that operations and development were in, where we wanted to look at the gift acceptance policy along with legal, and then just forge a little bit better language.
I was going to ask you a question about being the no police, but it sounds like to me that you're sort of the we'll figure it out and work together police.
That's what it is oftentimes. I think that it's never a no. It's always we want to say yes, but what are the conditions under which we can say yes?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that's why it's important, and you mentioned it, it's having a gift acceptance policy, because that at least gives fundraising some guardrails as they go out there. This way, what you're getting is not some things that you need to walk back too much, because you've got that gift acceptance policy. So I think that's a great point.
I want to talk a little bit about campaigns at the end and gift acceptance policies, donor vetting policies, but we're getting a couple of questions here, and I think this is a good moment to talk about creating a culture of collaboration and avoiding silos. So, there are questions here about, any recommendations on ideal structures that help facilitate cooperation between finance, development, and operations. Any recommendations you have here? I think one of you used the word around, connective tissue, being the connective tissue that you can, share with our audience here.
Yeah, I think on the connective tissue, again, just speaking from experience, maybe for me, it wasn't at the CFO or the chief fundraising level, but it was 1 or 2 levels down, the controller, the assistant controller with the director of planned giving, and making sure that they, are connected in ways, whether that's, just monthly check-ins. I was big about the finance team, checking in with the donor team, periodically, just to say, hey, what's going on? Back to what I said earlier, are there things in the pipeline we should know about and hear about? And also, I think putting some wins on the board, in the sense that if finance and operations can show that they're not the no police all the time, that they're willing to collaborate and to work, to work with the donor team. Look, we're not always going to win. No one's going to win 100% of the time. There will be times where it will have to be a no for whatever reason. Hopefully, those are few and far between. But I think if you establish that credibility of, I don't want to say no, I'm looking to get to yes. And that's something I've always done in my career. It's, okay, we've got a problem. Okay, let's figure out how we get to yes if we can. And just have that sense of openness and willingness. I've seen far too many finance departments that go in with it's no already, it's no because I said so, the old parental way of doing it. So I think the finance and operations teams just need to be willing and open, and so do the donor teams, and willing to work together.
Yeah. And building on that, I think it's periodic meetings, but meetings also between the chief development officer and the COO or equivalents, to set the tone for collaboration and just always making sure that they're operating in lockstep. So I meet with my counterpart, Ruth, all the time just to make sure that we understand what is coming down the pike. Making sure that we are clearing the air, like what might be getting in the way. Um, what campaigns do you have? What gifts are coming up? Are there any proposals that might need to that we might need to make time for? And in fact, I don't actually, Ruth doesn't have to know. I don't have to know because the people on our team are already talking, to Dominick's point. And they're already talking about kickoff meetings. Before proposals have to be written, they're already talking about the pitches and they're meeting with programs so that they can craft those. They're talking about what is the best way to craft and package different programs. What unrestricted dollars might we be able to displace, whatever it may be? How can this best appeal to a donor? And so those conversations are always happening. And so I think that is probably the best way to position those two teams so that they're always collaborating. The other is, I think for me, knowing when reports are due, when proposals might be needed, so that they don't coincide with monthly close, so they don't coincide with audits, right? Because then that's when it's you want to say no. You're just like, no, it's really hard right now. We have to close the month or whatever it is, right? You can't say no, right? But you're just like, this is really a really bad time. But if we can know about those things early, we can always say yes.
And not to waste an opportunity in a webinar to talk about remote work, but this is where to everything that Russatta and I just talked about, it's so much easier when folks are in person to do a lot of the things that we're saying. It's tougher to let me send someone a Zoom link or a Teams invite, or it's so much easier to walk by. Hey, how's it going? How's things going? I heard about this or I heard about that. So the in-person collaboration, people talk about it and say, well, give me examples of where it works. This would be an example of where I think it would work with those two departments for sure.
There's a question here that I want to reference, especially on what you're saying about like working effectively together. So the example is around budgeting for the fiscal year. And typically fundraising submits a realistic fundraising revenue. This member of our audience said that last year expenses were higher than anticipated. So finance raised the fundraising goal without consulting the team. I'm pretty sure many people on this call have had a similar experience. Do you have, in addition to what you said, any recommendations for ground rules or anything beyond just constant communication and meetings that you would recommend to this audience member and how to handle that kind of situation?
And say it again. Fine. So what was raised?
So the revenue, the expenses were higher than anticipated. And so the finance team set, without consulting the development team, a higher fundraising goal than they had originally projected. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to, I'll just jump in. It goes to what we talked about earlier, which is the collaboration and the sitting down and having that discussion. You would hope that something like that doesn't occur. That finance either has a really good sense of why the expenses went up and then can make some assumptions on the revenue, but then obviously go back to the development team and say, okay, I see what's happening here. Here's where this is, how does this look? Because when you go to these meetings and you present to finance committees and others, both finance and fundraising need to be able to stand behind those numbers. And it becomes tough if finance is just erasing and putting new numbers in place. So that collaboration is really, really key. And that communication, it comes back to communication.
Yeah, that's surprising. I wonder if a way, in this coming fiscal year, if there's a way then for the team to have two different scenarios. Maybe they have, or maybe three, I don't know, but maybe they have worst, best, and, actual, I don't know, like three different, like worst, best, and middle case scenario, something like that, so that the team is fully prepared for all three different scenarios. And the development team knows that they might have to kick it into high gear just in case, economic conditions change and, expenses for whatever reason are higher. But I wonder also if there is a I'm just surprised. I think I'm just kind of surprised then that there is not a some type of trigger that would alert the organization as a whole that we now need to raise our revenue target.
So maybe a statute
Dominic.
trigger also would be helpful.
Yeah.
We've got a parallel question, actually. What about the opposite, where development is asked what their projections will be and set the goal, but then later they hear from the program team that they don't have enough money to effectively do what they're hoping to do?
Oh, this is, I think, these right here, these questions strike me as the team probably needs some support on forecasting and budgeting. This seems like finance probably needs to support the team on better budgeting. It's not an easy skill. And I know that there are some, I don't want to use the wrong word to offend people, but sometimes it is easy to look at last year's budget and simply copy it or just say plus or minus. But the more rigorous approach would be to simply start from scratch and to say our needs this year will be, and to maybe go out for quotes and to accurately price what the needs are, and go out to the market and say, this is what a consultant will be, and say, I will have 60 participants and a hotel will be, or whatever it may be, right? But I think that is probably a bigger endeavor, and a lot of organizations may not have the time or may not want to go through that exercise, but that will yield a more accurate budget, and it will help to avoid underestimating what your costs are. Dominic?
Yeah, I was getting the same sense that you were. It feels like there needs to be kind of the budget 101 of let's build this budget, let's kind of lock arms in finance operations and on the fundraising team and really say, what do we need to do for the next year? And as you get better at it, for multiple years, because that could be the other approach, is not just budgeting for 1 year, budget across multiple years. And the budget, the budget is the budget, but you can reforecast a couple of times during the year as conditions change. If the economy, is in the tank, well, then obviously the revenue projections, need to come down, and everyone from the board on down needs to understand that this is how it is. But again, if you potentially lay it out over multiple years, that may soften some of the things that we're hearing come out of this, because then, revenue up in one year with expenses down or vice versa, kind of evens out in the end. But yeah, I completely agree with you. So
those are great recommendations and insights. And we've got a question here, and also Dominic, building on what you said, we've been spending a lot of time talking internally about, working with the executive team, but part of your roles are also engaging board members and other volunteer leaders. So would love to hear your perspective on how do you collaborate with those types of leaders and foster a culture of shared responsibility and accountability.
One approach I've had, and these are very busy individuals, they're volunteering their time, as a board member. But what I've tried to do is throughout the year, if there's only 3 or 4 meetings, that's just not enough engagement to have for them to feel that shared responsibility. So there's been at least a couple of times a year with the chair of the finance committee or whatever similar type committee, either a meeting or a lunch, and just to kind of talk through, update, here's what's happening, here's what's going on. It does 2 things. One, it keeps them in the know, and as board members, they feel like if they know more, that individual will know more than their colleagues and feel a sense of pride. But also it's a no surprise kind of thing. The last thing you'd want to do is go to a finance committee meeting 4 months in, and all of a sudden it's, well, we did the budget back in November, but here's everything that's happened since then that's caused us an issue. It'd be really helpful to have, if it's the chair and maybe some other committee members, because they've been in the know for those few months, to be supportive or to even have some solutions based on some feedback that they've given you. So while, you don't want them to be too far in the role of management, I do think the expertise that, for which they were selected to be on the board in the first place can be really helpful, and should lean on it, obviously within reason, but should lean on them and inform them and kind of take their feedback. And I feel like that's worked wonders for me over my career, having them be supportive in what could potentially be a tough meeting, where they say, nope, I've been informed, I know about it, what they're saying is correct, and it kind of just moves the issue along. So that would be my sense.
Russatta, anything to add, or any tools that you've developed to help support those types of conversations to make sure there is that alignment?
Yeah. So it's not always easy to do. It takes time, but at DataKind, what we did is, for our executive team, we developed a strategic dashboard, and it included some performance metrics that we used as the executive team, and then we started sharing it with our board. And so we shared that with them on a bi-monthly basis, even between board meetings. And that was really helpful because it kept them abreast of how we are performing. It gave them a sense of our progress. And so when we got to our board meeting, they had a sense of where we were going and what had happened along the way. So they weren't so far removed because they're doing their day-to-day life and their business. So they felt like they were in the know. And then also, because I was in charge of compliance, I gave them compliance reports along the way too. So they understood how we were doing on our filings, and if there were any key incidents. So they understood a risk assessment, the things that we needed to do on trainings, and things like that. So they could offer their own takes on, this is what I think you should do. And so they knew where to plug in. And so those were some of the other things that we did, in addition to what Dominic offered.
And just to double click on something that Russatta said, I think metrics are important. I feel like over at least the last 10 years in board meetings, boards have been more and more asking for those types of metrics. So what are the metrics that are important for the organization to measure? How do you measure them? And then how do you communicate them? Because I feel like that's it's a trend, and I think it shows thoughtfulness. And again, these are things that you could show not just to the board, but to potential donors as well.
And accountability and transparency. We
Yes.
have a question here about can you share a little bit more on how you worked to develop those metrics with the team?
Yeah. So I thought about it like the dashboard in your car. And so it was not meant to be super detailed. It was meant to fit on a sheet of paper. And it was really meant to give a sense of health for the organization. So at a high level, does it give me a sense of, are we moving in the right direction? And it could tell me, do I need to dig any further? And so it would, so I had a sense of what I needed it to, so I have to give you an example. So it was before, it was not here at the foundation, but it was elsewhere. When I need to think about cash on hand, for instance. So we were always teetering somewhere around maybe 8 to 12 months of cash on hand. And so I knew that I felt comfortable having at least 9 months of cash on hand. And if it was below that, then I would give myself maybe a yellow. And if it fell way below, it was a red. And so I had conditional formatting on that Excel cell. And that would tell me I need to dig a little bit further. And that also told my board they should ask me some questions. And so that would be a conversation then if my finance chair wanted to dig into it in a committee meeting. Hey, let's talk about this. How is the revenue pipeline looking? Or how is expense management looking? And so like that would be maybe where the conversation would go from there. But that would be something that would be one of the performance metrics that would be on there. Then in terms of so that would be one of the metrics for finance. For our communications, for instance, we might put up there social media engagement. I can't remember an actual, that probably wouldn't be one because I won't use that because I can't remember a metric, but maybe the number of volunteers that we had. We might put on there the number of volunteers that we engaged in the last 3 months. We had a range because we had a certain number of projects that we wanted to run. And so we had a range and it would give me, you know, again, red, yellow, or green. And so we knew what historically felt good for us. And so depending upon our mission and what historically felt good, that would be a metric that would sit on there. So we thought about the categories were finance, it would be revenue, it would be I don't know, Dominic, what are some other categories that might sit up there? Trying to do this off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things I was going to say, which everything you said makes sense, is the metrics should also be simple and measurable. And I say that because, and I don't remember the example exactly, but it was something where funds were going to a particular country, and one of the metrics that was put out up front was, okay, how many jobs does it create? And with that job creation, how many of those people's kids are going to college? Well, that sounds great. No, how do we, let's measure this. Then we find out that the funds were going to mainly single men in there from 18 to 22 who don't have kids. So now, is that metric have to wait until they get married and have kids, in however many years, and then for the kid to go to college? No, we need to be realistic. Let's set it up front so that it's things that we actually can measure. And to your point, Russatta, I like the cash on hand one. It's simple. It sounds really simple, but it's easily measurable and something that it can be a red, green, or yellow light. And no, we've got to dig deeper on something like this. So simplicity, 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 simplicity.
Yeah, I would say no more than 10. And there were things that I pulled that different departments were responsible for helping operations populate that dashboard. And so everyone looked at it across the organization. So the executive team looked at it, operations maintained it, every department helped to populate it.
Before we get to campaigns, there's a question here about ROI, and I think it's pretty well aligned with what we're talking about with dashboards here. This audience member says that they've worked in a lot of organizations in the South, in particular, that haven't married their CRM to their accounting software. So as a fundraiser, they're in the dark and don't really feel like they know the cost to ROI. And is there a way to make this more mandatory in order to create that kind of transparency?
I'll say it's an age-old issue because it happens at a lot of organizations, and even when they are married up, sometimes the CRM is not updated, that you can actually get good data out of it. I don't have a magic bullet type answer, just to kind of commiserate and say that this is an issue probably not-for-profit wide for one reason or another. So not a great answer, and I know organizations do struggle with this.
Okay, so we're here with you.
Yes.
My last questions are around kind of the special moment of launching a campaign. Russatta, we're working with the Ms. Foundation in the 50th anniversary campaign right now, and would love to hear from both of you around strategic planning for campaigns. And specifically, how do you approach campaigns as opportunities to reset and innovate rather than simply kind of going as routine activities? You know, we've mentioned some things like gift acceptance policies. Are there things, you know, from your perspectives that need to be incorporated into that campaign planning in order to set the team up successfully for fundraising?
Yeah. So I was really grateful that we could work with your team in advance. So Ruth and I sat down with your team, and we were thinking holistically about how this might change our operations. And so I learned about finance life insurance for the first time. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about the gift acceptance policy. Does that need to be included in the gift acceptance policy? Okay, great. So let's make that possible. And then does that change our operations? Does my team need to get trained on that? Let's make sure that happens before a gift is even discussed, so that it is a seamless process for a donor. And then differently or separately, this is an opportunity to think about menus of items at different price points and different parts of the mission. So we did this at DataKind. So at DataKind, we were having a really hard time because at DataKind, there were people who understood how AI and machine learning could be used to support nonprofits. And then there are those who could not understand it at all. But we found a way to slice and dice the work that we did to have discovery days so that those who did not understand AI and machine learning could dip their toes in. And so very low price point. But then those who did understand the value of it, like a google.org, they could get digital public goods. And they could enter in at a much higher price point. And we could create a menu of items, different price points, and there were multiple things from which you could choose. And so then it allowed those frontline fundraisers to go out and tailor what they talked about. And so now when you have campaigns, you have a number of different things that you can talk about, and then finance knows how to price it appropriately, and fundraising does not feel like they have only a few things to talk about, and they know how to actually capture the full value.
That's a great point. And it's such an important piece of the campaign planning. I'm so glad you brought up the menu. And I think it takes planning and collaboration and communication, but your point about that seamless process with the donor is so critical. I also want to add in here a trend we're seeing just kind of across the nonprofit sector around raising funds for endowments. So, and endowment specific campaigns, and
Yes.
endowments being a big part of campaign fundraising. So would also love to hear your perspectives on launching these types of campaigns and thinking specifically about the endowment piece. Dominick, any thoughts here?
Yeah, it goes to what I was going to say on the initial question, which is what do you want to get out of the campaign? How do you communicate that appropriately? And then how do you set it up to be different? And different being, are we doing the rubber chicken dinner like everyone's done for the last 100 years, or are we being more thoughtful? What do we want out of the campaign? Yes, we'd all love the dollars, but as part of the campaign, and it for the endowment, if it is, that will take a lot of nuanced communications to say, why should we be giving so that you can, put this in your coffers, essentially. How does this help the mission? And being able to show, I always love to show the math of how a donation to the endowment of X dollars this year would be able to fund programs over the next 5 to 10 years. And here's how the numbers play out. The numbers are, and again, I know I'm the finance/process geek, but the numbers don't lie. And it's the tyranny of the math, as someone once said to me. And when you see it, it's striking, and you know what you're getting for it. So, oh, this makes sense. It's not just fluff of I'm giving for the endowment and then they're going to invest it, they're going to earn 8%, and it's going to do great things. That's less helpful to a donor than saying your $1 million will be worth this over 5 years, and we'll be able to fund this, and this. So on the endowment side, I think that's an approach that is nuanced, but can be done.
Do you want to add on to that, Russatta? Any final thoughts that both of you want to share with our audience today?
I do want to add to your point, Dominick. One of the things that I love about our endowment is that it is 100% mission related, invested. And so it's an opportunity also to let funders know or donors know that you're not only making a difference programmatically, but also with the dollars that are invested, you're making a difference that way too. And so that is another way to also let a donor know, in the capital market, you are also making a difference. And so that is a way that we're able to also differentiate ourselves in a fundraising campaign. And so I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, and I think it's been sprinkled throughout what we've talked about, when it comes to finance/operations and the donor team, it's all about communication and collaboration. And I think just setting in and putting into place a lot of the things we've discussed this last hour, I think will go a long way. And again, everyone's just recognizing, it's not always going to be no, and it's not always going to be yes. So.
Yeah, and I do want to say overall, it is truly a collaboration, and I think that the operations, finance functions, they do see themselves as supports. They always want to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's always under the guise of under what conditions. And it's just, how can we say yes? And it's just with enough time and with enough resources, we will be able to. So yeah, like, let's just talk. I think it's just talking more and just talking early. We're always able to make things happen.
Yeah, I don't think I know any finance person that wants to say no to feeding hungry children or to helping the elderly. I mean, if you think of it in that context, people are inherently good, and they're going to want to get to yes on those things. So.
Mhm.
Thank you both. And to everyone for joining Orr Group Talks. We might take that, Russatta, talking early, talking often, talking Orr Group with great guests, and really enjoyed the audience questions today. Thank you so much. And really appreciate Russatta and Dominick joining us today, sharing your insights and your candid perspective. I think there were some really great takeaways that people hopefully can go back to their teams and start working on. And if nothing else, I think all of us really feel excited about continuing to collaborate with our finance and operations colleagues. All right.
Thank
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for joining.